Dear Lord, when our strength fails and our voices tremble, let mercy find us through the hands of strangers. Where fear lives, plant courage. Where silence grows heavy, let kindness speak. And when we call out for help, let love answer. Amen. The lights in the living room were soft, barely glowing through the linen curtains. Outside, the Houston night carried the echo of children's laughter from down the block. A radio played gospel low from the neighbor's porch, and the city breathed the slow hum of another ordinary evening. But inside apartment 3B, time was folding in on itself. Alvina sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring a crayon drawing of a dog with big floppy ears and a smile like hers. Her mother, Davina, had just walked through the door, purse still on her shoulder, keys barely tossed into the bowl. "Baby, I'm home," Davina had whispered moments earlier, kissing the crown of her little girl's head. She moved slowly now, her feet dragging more than usual. 12-hour shift behind the bar, laughter with customers, gospel jokes in the kitchen, and 2 missed meals. Her hand reached for the fridge handle, and then stopped. Something cracked in her chest, her knees buckled. Davina's body tilted sideways, the room tilting with it, and with a sound no louder than a sigh, she dropped onto the couch cushion like a puppet whose strings had snapped. Her eyes closed. Her chest barely moved. Alvina looked up. "Mommy?" she asked, still holding the crayon. She waited for her mom to open her eyes, to smile, to say, "I'm just tired, baby." But she didn't. Alvina dropped her crayon. The silence in the room wasn't loud, it was sharp, like something had just been stolen from it. Alvina ran to her mother, her socks slipping against the tile. "Mommy!" she cried, tugging at her sleeve. Davina didn't move. The 5-year-old's hands shook. Her lips trembled. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that were already winning. She remembered something her teacher had said just 2 weeks ago during safety class. If something happens at home, and you're scared, call someone. But who? She didn't know how to find 911. The red button on the phone scared her. Her small fingers grabbed her mother's phone off the coffee table. It buzzed once, a message notification. With trembling hands and a desperate heart, she pressed the green button on the last missed call, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would answer. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. She sniffled. "Please pick up," she whispered. On the 4th ring, a click, deep, calm, clear. "Hello?" Alvina's sob cracked through her throat. My mommy collapsed. "Please help." For a moment, the only thing Alvina could hear was her own breathing, fast, shaky, the way a child breathes when the world suddenly feels too big. On the other end of the call, the man stayed silent for half a second, not out of confusion but out of shock. He could hear every tremble, every tear sliding down her words. And in that pause, something universal lived. Because anyone who has ever loved someone, even once, knows that fear. That helpless moment where your heart sinks into your stomach and you can't breathe right. Where you watch the strongest person you know suddenly look fragile. Where you feel small, too small to fix anything. Even grown men have frozen in those moments. Even mothers have whispered prayers under their breath. Even fathers have looked at their children and felt weakness in their knees. So when that little girl's voice cracked through the phone, asking for help with nothing but hope in her throat, it wasn't just her fear speaking. It was the same fear every human has felt at least once. The man on the phone gently asked, "Sweetheart, are you alone with her?" Alvina wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Yes, it's just us." Her small voice broke again. "I tried to wake her up, but she won't wake up." She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't overreacting. She was 5 years old, kneeling beside the most important person in her life, and watching the familiar warmth of home slip into something she didn't understand. Anyone watching that moment would have felt something tighten in their chest. Anyone. Because there's a strange kind of silence that falls when someone you love goes still. It doesn't matter whether you're a child or grown. That silence sparks a kind of fear that sinks straight into your bones. The man's voice softened, lowering to the kind of tone adults use when they're trying not to scare a child any further. "Okay, sweetheart. I'm right here. You did the right thing calling. I'm not going anywhere." Alvina swallowed hard. "Are you going to help my mommy?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I'll help you both. I promise. Promises matter to children." And in that moment, she clung to it, as if it were the only sturdy thing left in her world. Her tiny hands clutched the phone so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts. She nodded even though he couldn't see her. Sometimes fear makes a child stronger than adults expect. Sometimes love makes courage show up in unexpected places. The man continued, "Can you tell me your name?" She sniffed. "Alvina." "That's a beautiful name," he said gently. "Now listen carefully. I'm going to help you and your mummy. I just need you to tell me what you see around you. Is Mummy breathing?" Alvina looked at her mother's chest, rising, falling, but too softly. "Yes, but she's not waking up. You're doing so well, Alvina. Just stay with me." Those words steadied her, the way a firm hand on your shoulder steadies you, the way someone saying you're not alone can calm a storm for a moment, because deep down, every viewer listening to this story knows there has been a moment, somewhere, sometime, where they too have felt that helplessness, watching someone you love slip into stillness, feeling tears rise before you can stop them, wanting so badly for someone, anyone, to answer your call for help. That is why this story connects, because the fear in her voice is not unfamiliar. It is human. Alvin Kingspare sat at his wide oak desk, staring at spreadsheets he no longer cared about. The soft hum of the office lights overhead blended into the sound of the city through the open window. It was supposed to be a quiet night. His calendar was clear. The assistant had gone home. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago. And then the phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up. His thumb hovered over the screen. But something pulled at him. The kind of instinct you don't learn in business school. He answered. What greeted him wasn't a voicemail, wasn't a scammer, wasn't even a voice that matched anything from his structured world. It was a child, sobbing. Alvin froze. "My mummy, she's on the floor," the voice cried through the phone. "She's not waking up." Alvin's instincts kicked in faster than his mind could. Hey, you did the right thing, sweetheart. I'm right here." His pen dropped, his coffee forgotten, every spreadsheet, every upcoming deal vanished from his priorities in that instant. "Tell me your name." "Alvina," she sniffled. "Alvina, okay, that's a beautiful name. Can you tell me where you are?" She tried, but she was small. She didn't know street numbers. She mumbled something about the alley near the place with music. She tried to spell her last name. She described the red chair by the window. She said her mom worked at the place with songs and lights and people that dance. Alvin took notes like a surgeon in a trauma room. It wasn't just her voice. It was what was behind her voice, the raw, unfiltered fear of a child who knew she didn't have the tools to fix this, but was trying anyway. He tapped into every Houston map in his head, and then she said it, one thing that connected all the dots. "My grandma lives next door to the blue house with the porch swing." That was it. He called 911 immediately. By the time he reached the location himself, 10 minutes later, paramedics were already there, helping a woman on a couch whose breathing was too shallow. And next to her, holding a blanket too big for her shoulders, stood the little girl who made the call. Alvin parked crooked in the middle of the street. He barely remembered how he got out of the car, but he'll never forget what she said to him when he knelt beside her. "You came," Alvina whispered. He nodded. "Of course I did. Because sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just calls, and hopes you're decent enough to answer." The next morning, Davina opened her eyes to the beeping of machines and the smell of clean linen. A hospital curtain danced slightly under the AC vent. She felt the dryness in her mouth before she saw the tube of 4 fluid dripping beside her. Her eyes moved slowly, then widened. Sitting at the edge of the bed, clutching her hand like it was a lifeline, was Alvina, and standing behind her, a man. She didn't know him, not really. But his eyes, steady, kind, were filled with something that didn't need a name. "Miss Krisha," he said softly, clearing his throat. "You fainted. But you're okay. Help came in time." Alvina gripped her hand tighter. "Mummy, I called him. He helped us." Davina blinked, tried to piece it together. The last thing she remembered was her legs going weak near the fridge, and then black. Now she was in a hospital bed, alive, because a man she'd never met picked up a phone he didn't have to answer. She tried to sit up, "Careful," Alvin said. "You were dehydrated, exhausted. You'll be fine." Davina swallowed. "You're Alvin Kingspare," he replied. "I'm just the guy who was lucky enough to answer your daughter's call." The words didn't land right away. She looked from her daughter to him, then back again. This wasn't just luck. It felt like something more. Like the kind of moment life gives you only once, when the right person appears in the middle of your storm and says, "I've got you." She opened her mouth, closed it again. No words, just tears, just gratitude. And that's what makes this story matter, because most of us go through life thinking no one will show up if we break down. We assume help has to come from people we know, but sometimes the ones who change your life are the ones you've never even met. Sometimes one phone call, one voice, one quiet act of humanity is enough to change everything. And for Davina and Alvina, it did. If you ever stepped into the Ruby Note on a Friday night in downtown Houston, you wouldn't miss her. Behind the polished bar counter, laughter in her throat and rhythm in her steps, stood Davina Krischer, 29, radiant, resilient, and known in the neighborhood as the heartbeat of the lounge. She wasn't flashy, she didn't try to be. Wearing a black tee tucked into high-waist jeans, gold hoop earrings, and her signature silver bracelet that never left her wrist, Davina moved with the ease of someone who'd made peace with struggle and was too busy blooming to be bitter. Her smile, effortless, her energy, contagious. Most nights, she knew nearly every face who walked in, from the construction guys shaking off a long week, to the ladies from the church office who always ordered sweet tea and danced to old-school R&B before heading home. Everyone loved her. "Girl, you be making this place feel like a second home," one customer joked, tipping his hat. "That's the point," Davina winked. "Ain't no healing without a little joy, sugar." She'd mastered the balance of being both the spark in the room and the glue that held herself together. Beneath the lipstick and charm, there was a woman fighting for something far bigger than tips. Every glass she wiped, every shift she powered through, it was all for her daughter, Alvina. Back in their modest third-floor apartment off Cullen Boulevard, Davina's world looked completely different. Not polished, not glamorous, but real. The kind of home where love lived in folded laundry, second-hand picture frames, and bedtime lullabies hummed over rice boiling on the stove. Alvina, her 5-year-old, had big eyes and even bigger questions. Most days she wore sparkly socks and ran barefoot across the carpet with peanut butter smeared across her cheek. She loved reading books upside down and thought all superheroes were moms with big purses and fast reflexes. Their little home was full of those tiny moments that made life rich. Crayon scribbles on the fridge, a pile of church bulletins stacked on the table, plastic tea sets scattered across the couch. Evenings were their favorite. That's when Alvina climbed into Davina's lap with her blanket trailing behind her, whispering, "Tell me that story again, the one where I was born." And Davina would smile, brushing her daughter's curls from her forehead. "You were born on a Tuesday," she'd say. "The rain stopped just long enough for me to see the sun through the hospital blinds. And when I saw you, I knew every hard thing I'd been through was worth it." Alvina's giggle always came at the same part, when Davina described how the baby's first sneeze startled the nurse. It was their rhythm, their peace, their home. Outside their building, Houston pulsed with life. Taco trucks steaming into the night, teens riding bikes under flickering streetlights, and the familiar smell of cornbread drifting from someone's window. Davina's neighborhood wasn't rich in money, but it overflowed with soul. People looked out for each other. The mailman prayed with you if you asked. Miss Oletta from down the hall always had enough gumbo for one more bowl. And the corner store cashier knew Alvina's favorite juice without asking. Faith lived in that community. Not just the Sunday kind, but the everyday kind. The kind that lets single moms keep pushing when bills stack up and sleep runs short. Davina never felt alone here, even when the weight of the world pressed on her chest, even when her paycheck barely stretched, even when her back ached from double shifts. She felt held. When the church bus stopped out front every Wednesday, she made sure Alvina had her hair tied up in pink beads and a bag of snacks. When the utility bill came late, a neighbor once slipped her a folded envelope with no name, just a post-it that said, "Keep going." Davina knew what it meant to survive, but more importantly, she knew what it meant to still smile in the midst of it. Sunday mornings were sacred. Davina and Alvina dressed in their church shine, pressed dresses, polished shoes, and a head wrap that matched her daughter's beads. Alvina skipped down the sidewalk, swinging her tiny purse, while Davina carried a container of peach cobbler to share after service. The church on McCree Street wasn't big. The paint was peeling. The choir robes were older than some of the deacons, but the spirit inside was alive. Voices rose in four-part harmony. Elders clapped on beat. Ushers greeted every soul like royalty. And Davina. She sang in the choir, alto, always a little off-key but full of heart. Back at home, Sunday dinner meant collard greens seasoned just right, cornbread crumbled over red beans, and a table where Alvina sat cross-legged in her booster seat reciting memory verses between mouthfuls. After dishes were washed and the night crept in, Davina sat with Alvina at the edge of her twin bed. They closed their eyes and whispered their prayer together. God, thank you for this day. Please keep Mummy safe at work. Let our home be full of love, and help us be kind and strong tomorrow. Amen. It was simple. It was enough. In that little room, in that little life, the presence of God felt big. Later that night, after Alvina had drifted off to sleep with her arms wrapped around her stuffed bunny, Davina stood by the window. The streetlights blinked in the distance. A gospel song played low from her phone, lyrics humming like a lullaby for her own tired heart. Her hand moved to the bracelet on her wrist, the same one she hadn't taken off in 5 years. It was silver, slightly worn, engraved with one name in smooth cursive, Alvina. Davina's fingers traced the letters slowly, as if reminding herself why she kept showing up every day, why she kept smiling even on the days when her chest felt hollow. She closed her eyes. God, just let me have enough strength for tomorrow, she whispered. In the stillness, a quiet thought passed through her heart, not a fear but a whisper she couldn't shake. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but somehow, deep inside, she knew her world was about to change, and the bracelet on her wrist pulsed like a promise. The hallway outside apartment 3B was quiet, soaked in the thick silence that usually followed midnight in their building. A flickering porch bulb buzzed softly above the walkway, casting a tired glow across the peeling paint on the railing. Davina turned her key in the lock, pushing the door open with a breath that trembled more than she intended. Her shift had been long, longer than she dared admit to anyone. The Ruby Note had hosted a birthday crowd, then a bachelor group, then the usual Friday stragglers who clung to the bar stools until closing. She'd been on her feet for nearly 12 hours, smiling through the ache in her back, joking through the tightness in her chest, pushing through the weariness that kept creeping up behind her shoulders. Still, when she stepped into her living room, Davina smiled. Alvina was curled on the couch with her blanket around her shoulders, hair tied in pink beads that shimmered whenever she turned her head. Her small workbook sat open beside her, a few scribbled letters, some crooked numbers. You stayed up for me? Davina whispered, toeing off her shoes. Alvina nodded sleepily. I missed you, Mummy. Davina scooped her up gently and kissed the top of her head. I missed you too, baby. The apartment felt warm, smelling faintly of leftover cornbread and lavender detergent. The night air outside hummed low, but inside, everything was still, safe, familiar. Davina walked toward the kitchen, intending to grab a quick snack before dropping into bed. But something about the way her hands trembled when she reached for the fridge handle made her pause. The dull pressure behind her eyes throbbed harder. Her mouth felt dry, her heart beat unsteady, each breath slightly shallow. She'd been pushing herself for weeks, double shifts, early mornings, skipped meals, late nights humming Alvina to sleep. She knew exhaustion better than most single mothers did, but tonight, it was different. A wave of dizziness washed over her so suddenly she gripped the counter for balance. A cold sweat broke out along her neck. The edges of the room began to soften and blur. Mommy? Alvina's voice floated from the couch. Davina tried to answer. She really did, but her tongue felt heavy, her breath too thin. She took one step toward her daughter, then another, and her knees buckled beneath her. The room tilted, the couch rushed toward her, and darkness swallowed everything. When Davina's body slumped onto the couch cushion, the sound wasn't loud, but to a 5-year-old who adored her mother, it was the loudest moment of her life. Alvina dropped her workbook. It hit the floor with a soft slap, crayons rolling under the coffee table. "Mommy?" she whispered, sliding off the couch. She approached slowly at first, unsure if her mother was joking or asleep. But when she touched Davina's arm and it didn't move, something inside her chest tightened. "Mommy?" She tried again, her voice cracking. She pushed gently at her mother's shoulder. Nothing. She shook her harder. Still nothing. Her tiny breath hitched. Tears formed immediately, quick and hot. Mummy, wake up," she begged, her hands trembling badly. "Please wake up." Davina's breathing was faint, barely there, shallow like someone who'd been running but suddenly stopped. Her eyes stayed closed, her lips parted just enough to let out the smallest sigh. Fear clawed at Alvina's throat, the kind of fear no child should ever meet. She stared around the room as if the walls might tell her what to do. The silence felt heavier now, the apartment dimmer, the shadows longer. In her panic, she remembered something her teacher said during a safety smart lesson. If someone is hurt and you don't know what to do, call someone. Any call is better than no call. She didn't know how to dial emergency numbers. She didn't know how to reach Grandma fast enough. But she did know how to open her mom's phone, so she grabbed it from the coffee table with both hands. The screen flashed to life with a message notification. Her vision blurred from tears, but she managed to swipe. Her breath shook as she tried to think. Call someone, anyone, just call. She pressed the green button on the most recent missed call. She didn't know who it was, but it was her only option. The phone rang in her tiny hand. Once, twice, 3 times. Her tears fell harder. "Please," she whispered, "please answer." On the 4th ring, the call clicked open. A quiet hello rolled through the speaker. It wasn't a dramatic voice. It wasn't loud or harsh or impatient. It sounded calm, steady, like someone who didn't know he was about to step into a child's crisis, but was willing to listen. Alvina let out a sob. "My mummy, she fell and won't wake up." The man paused, but only for a breath. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I need you to breathe for me, okay? Are you hurt?" "No," she cried. "Just Mummy. You're doing a very brave thing by calling Alvina." The sound of her name, spoken by someone she didn't know, made her curl tighter into herself. But his tone wasn't scary. It didn't make her hide. It made her listen. "Can you tell me where you live?" he asked. I don't know the number." She choked. "That's okay. Look around. Tell me anything you see." Alvina wiped her nose with her sleeve. The lamp by the window flickered. Her stuffed bunny sat on the floor. Outside, through the curtains, she could see the corner store sign glowing blue. She tried to describe it all. "My house is near the store with the blue light, and Mommy works at the place with music and dancing and people laughing." The man listened, truly listened, piecing together her tiny clues. She mentioned the alley where she played hopscotch. She mentioned Grandma next door. She whispered the name of their street as best as she could remember it. Every detail mattered. Every word she said was a line connecting her to hope. "Stay with me, Alvina," he said softly. "I'm calling for help right now. You're doing everything right." She clutched the phone tighter. "Don't go." "I won't," he promised. "I'm right here." That voice belonged to Alvin Kingspare, a 38-year-old CEO who moments earlier had been reviewing business files in his high-rise office. He wasn't expecting calls. His night was supposed to be routine, quiet, predictable. But the moment he heard Alvina crying, everything inside him shifted. He ended the call only long enough to dial emergency services, relaying every detail the child had managed to say. The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but Alvin didn't stop there. He grabbed his keys, he shut his laptop. He didn't wait for an assistant, driver, or security detail. Something deeper than logic pulled him out the door. 15 minutes later, record time for Houston traffic, Alvin rushed into the narrow street where paramedics' lights flashed against apartment walls. An ambulance was parked. Outside building 117B, a stretcher was being adjusted. EMTs were bent over a woman lying on the couch inside, and beside them stood Alvina, clutching her stuffed bunny and shaking so hard her small shoulders trembled. When she saw him, a stranger she'd never met, she recognized his voice instantly. "You came," she whispered. Alvin crouched down, his eyes softening. Of course I did. He placed a steady hand on her back, shielding her from the frantic movement around them. He didn't know Davina yet. He didn't know her story, her life, her struggles, her hopes. But he knew a little girl had called him for help. And that was enough. As EMTs secured Davina, Alvin gathered Alvina into his arms, holding her as if protecting her from the world's chaos. In that moment, 3 lives, one powerful CEO, one exhausted mother, and one terrified child, collided in a way none of them could have predicted. A stranger had answered a call, and nothing in their world would ever be the same again. 38-year-old Alvin Kingsbear was a man who had built his empire from a single coffee cart on a college campus to a nationwide cafe chain known for its blend of family warmth and urban edge. Now, at the top floor of a downtown Houston glass tower, he sat behind a curved walnut desk, looking out over the city that never quite rested. His office was modern but not cold. Tall windows stretched across one side, a shelf of coffee memorabilia lined the other, and an espresso machine that cost more than some people's cars sat humming near the corner. Despite all the buzz surrounding him, media mentions, board reports, franchise meetings, Alvin carried himself with stillness. His staff often said he could command a room with just a look, not because he was intimidating, but because he paid attention. He remembered names, birthdays, and how you took your drink. Tonight, his dark grey blazer was tossed over the back of his leather chair. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows. The digital clock blinked past 10 p.m. He was alone. His assistant had gone home hours ago. Most of the city had settled into sleep or celebration. But Alvin had stayed, as he often did, not out of necessity, but out of habit. This office had become a place where silence kept him company more than people. Where some CEOs obsessed over their next acquisition, Alvin kept a different obsession, building systems that lasted. His mind worked in blueprints, not just physical spaces, but relationships, workflows, emotional bridges. He believed in creating something people could depend on. But what he hadn't built was a life outside of all that. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a boyish version of himself beside his late mentor. No spouse, no children, no Sunday dinners or family group chats, just a successful man, with a stunning view and no one to share it with. Alvin was the kind of man people trusted, not because he demanded it, but because he offered it first. He never raised his voice in meetings. He didn't carry ego into conversations. If anything, people often mistook his calm nature for detachment, but those close to him knew better. Behind that composed exterior was a man who had quietly funded literacy programs in underfunded schools, who'd once anonymously covered a struggling cafe owner's rent when a storm shut them down for a month, who made time to check on baristas after a long shift, even when his own schedule was stacked. But kindness can be lonely when it has nowhere consistent to land. Alvin had dated before, a few women, successful, beautiful, driven, but nothing had stayed. There was always some invisible wall between his heart and the world, as if a piece of him had quietly settled for solitude while the rest of him kept pretending he hadn't. He didn't talk about his father much, or how his mother passed when he was in college, or how, even with all the cities he visited, the hotel beds never felt like home. Most days he filled the emptiness with purpose, with systems, with plans. But not tonight. Tonight, he stared at the screen of his phone, mentally rehearsing a speech for an upcoming charity gala, until it rang. The caller ID was unfamiliar, a local number, but not one saved in his phone. He almost ignored it, but something made him pick up, and then a child's cry. My mommy collapsed. She's not waking up. His spine stiffened, every instinct sharpened. Sweetheart, he said slowly, trying to keep his voice even, can you hear me okay? The sob on the other end was gut-wrenching. Yes, what's your name? Alvina. His hand was already reaching for a pen. He didn't interrupt her, didn't panic, just listened, took notes. She spoke in pieces, scared but trying. She told him what she saw, the window light, the red chair, the store with the blue sign outside. Alvin scribbled every detail, heart pounding but face composed. You're doing great, Alvina, he said gently. I promise I'm not going to leave you. You're so brave. He could hear her breathing, quick, shallow, scared. I'm going to call someone to come help your mummy, right now. He clicked into his other line and dialed 911, relaying everything she'd said. down to the name of her street and the visible landmarks. As soon as the dispatcher confirmed help was en route, Alvin grabbed his blazer and keys. He didn't wait for logic to stop him. He moved on instinct, because something in that little girl's voice cracked open a place in him he thought had sealed shut years ago. The Houston streets blurred past him like a dream he didn't ask for. His Tesla slid between traffic lights and potholes, GPS tracking the route to the address the dispatcher had confirmed. He didn't care about red lights, didn't hear the music playing in the background. His focus was locked in. He wasn't racing because he thought he was a hero. He was racing because it felt unbearable not to. Every few seconds he glanced at the notes on the passenger seat. Alvina, 5 years old. Mother unconscious. Location confirmed. Help on the way. 10 minutes, 10 long minutes. And then, sirens. He saw the flashing lights a block ahead, pulled up to the curb. Didn't bother parking correctly. When he stepped out of the car, the air smelled like pavement and worry. Inside the apartment, paramedics moved swiftly. Davina lay unconscious on the couch, oxygen mask over her face, heartbeat monitor steady but weak. But Alvin's eyes landed on someone else first. Alvina. Small, tired, teary-eyed, clutching her bunny with one hand and a grown-up amount of fear in the other. She looked up at him, and in that second, though she had never seen his face, her little lips parted and she whispered, "You came." He bent down slowly, meeting her eyes. "Of course I did," he said. He didn't ask for permission, didn't try to explain. He simply knelt beside her and stayed. The stairwell of building 117B echoed with hurried footsteps, Alvin's footsteps, as he sprinted up the final flight, driven by instinct more than reason. He had no suit jacket now, just a white shirt clinging to the tension across his shoulders. He didn't stop to catch his breath, didn't pause to measure the moment. He only followed the sound, a child's cry, faint but sharp, trembling but strong enough to guide him straight to the open doorway of apartment 3B. "Alvina!" he called softly, stepping inside. The living room was dim, the lamp flickering slightly over the couch. Crayons were scattered across the floor. A small workbook lay open on the rug. And just a few feet away, there she was. Alvina stood, clutching her stuffed bunny, her cheeks wet, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. Her eyes, wide and frightened, lifted when she heard his voice. The same voice that steadied her over the phone. "You came," she whispered. He crouched down immediately, lowering himself to her height. "Of course," he murmured. "I wasn't going to leave you alone." She stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck. It wasn't a hug of softness. It was a hug of survival, the kind you give when your world has tilted and you cling to the one thing that feels safe. "It's okay," Alvin whispered, rubbing her back with the care of someone who understood fear more deeply than he liked to admit. "You're not alone anymore." Her breath hitched, then steadied just enough for her to speak. "Mummy won't wake up." Alvin glanced toward the couch and felt his chest tighten. Davina lay motionless, her breathing shallow, her arm dangling off the cushion. "It's okay," he reassured Alvina again. "Help is coming." He positioned himself beside her, shielding her gently from the sight of her mother's stillness while staying close enough to respond the moment EMTs arrived. In that living room, with a child gripping him like a lifeline and a mother fighting for breath, Alvin understood something. This night wasn't an accident. It was a calling. Moments later, a faint groan broke through the quiet. Alvina gasped and turned. "Mummy!" Alvin held her shoulders gently. "Wait, sweetheart. Let me check first." He stepped to the couch, lowering his voice as if approaching a fragile heartbeat. Davina's eyelids twitched. Her breathing wavered. She shifted slightly, confused by the light and the blurred shapes around her. "Miss Krisher?" Alvin said softly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, sluggish, unfocused, landing first on the ceiling, then on the blurred figure leaning over her. "What? Who?" Her voice was a rasp. "It's Alvin," he replied calmly. "I answered Alvina's call. You passed out, but you're okay. Help is almost here." She blinked again, this time slower, trying to make sense of the moment. The ceiling light felt too bright. Her body felt heavy, as if gravity had decided to take more than its share. Alvina stumbled toward her, tears returning. "Mommy, I was scared." Davina lifted her hand weakly, brushing her daughter's cheek. "Baby, I'm here. I'm okay." But her voice faltered. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably. Her chest tightened with the panic of not knowing what had happened. "Relax," Alvin said gently. "You're safe. Just breathe slowly. I don't remember. I was in the kitchen," she whispered, confused. "You fainted," he explained. "Your daughter did everything right." Davina tried to sit up, then groaned as dizziness hit her again. Alvin steadied her with a careful touch, not forceful, not invasive, just supportive, grounding, steadying her without overwhelming her. "Take your time," he said, voice warm and reassuring. "Don't push yourself." Everything about his presence soothed the chaos swirling inside her. She didn't know who he was, why he cared, or how he got there so fast, but in her disoriented, vulnerable state, his calmness felt like the only solid thing in the room. As Davina slowly regained awareness, the apartment filled with soft murmurs of reassurance. Alvina whispering, "Don't go," Alvin rubbing her small back, and Davina's faint breaths trying to steady themselves. Alvin sat beside Alvina again, letting her lean into him. She rested her head on his chest, gripping his shirt tightly. He held her close, not like a stranger, but like someone who truly understood how fear could swallow a child whole. "Is Mummy going to be okay?" she asked through hiccuped breaths. "Yes," Alvin said with certainty, not because he had medical knowledge, but because she needed that promise to hold on to. "She's breathing, and help is moments away." Davina watched the scene through glossy eyes, her daughter in a stranger's arms, the stranger's hand stroking her daughter's back gently. The stranger whispering things that were meant to calm her own heart too, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she trusted him. "Thank you," she whispered weakly. Alvin looked at her. "You don't need to thank me." But the sincerity in his voice revealed that the moment meant something to him too, something he wasn't used to feeling. He kept one hand on Alvina's shoulder and reached the other toward Davina, steadying her again as she tried to shift. His touch was careful, respectful. Her hand trembled when it met his. Their eyes held, only for a second. But it was enough to imprint the moment, a bond formed in crisis, fragile but real. Sirens cut through the night, growing louder until bright flashing lights painted the apartment walls. EMTs rushed into the room with crisp uniforms and urgent footsteps. "Ma'am, can you hear us?" one asked as they approached Davina. She nodded slowly. Yes." They began assessing her, checking vitals, asking questions gently but quickly. Davina answered in fragments, her voice wavering. Alvina squeezed Alvin's hand. "Can she come home tonight? We'll see what the doctors say," Alvin whispered. When the EMTs lifted Davina onto the stretcher, her eyes darted around anxiously. "My baby." "I'm right here, Mummy," Alvina cried, trying to climb onto the stretcher. Alvin gently pulled her back before she accidentally interfered with the medical equipment. "They're helping her, sweetheart. She needs to lie still. We'll follow." Davina's gaze shifted to him, a mix of fear, gratitude, and vulnerability. "Please, don't let her be alone." "You have my word," Alvin said. "She'll stay with me." Something inside her settled at those words. As the stretcher rolled toward the ambulance, Alvina clung to Alvin's arm. He lifted her gently, carrying her down the stairs. She held onto him as if her world depended on it, and for that moment it truly did. At the hospital, while doctors examined Davina behind curtains, Alvin sat with Alvina in the waiting area. He held her on his lap, wrapped his blazer around her shoulders, and let her fall asleep against him. He waited. He didn't leave. He stayed until the doctor finally said, "She's awake. You can see her." In the small hospital room, Davina sat up against a pair of pillows, her face pale but her eyes open now, exhausted but grounded. When Alvina saw her, she scrambled out of Alvin's arms and ran straight to her. "Mummy!" Davina hugged her tight, closing her eyes with a trembling breath. "My brave girl, my brave, brave girl." Alvin stood by the doorway, his presence quiet but strong. When Davina looked up at him, her eyes glistened. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. He shook his head. "Tonight, your daughter was the one who saved you." Davina looked down at Alvina, who was wiping her tears with the sleeve of her tiny sweater. She found the courage to call. Alvin continued. "She stayed calm, She told me everything she could. She did exactly what you taught her." Alvina sniffled. "Did I do good?" "You did more than good," Alvin replied, kneeling beside her. "You were a hero tonight." Her little chin lifted with pride, the first smile she'd managed since the moment she dialed that call. "Really?" she whispered. "Really," Alvin said with a warm smile. "Your mummy is here because of you." Davina felt her throat tighten. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one engraved with her daughter's name, and whispered a thank you she knew God had already heard. And in that small, quiet hospital room, one mother breathed easier, one child felt stronger, and one stranger, who no longer felt like a stranger, stood silently at the beginning of a new chapter neither of them saw coming. It had been 4 days since the hospital night, the night that realigned the paths of 3 lives. Davina was now back home, resting as much as she could with a 5-year-old who never ran out of energy and neighbors dropping off prayers wrapped in Tupperware. Still, a piece of her hadn't fully returned to normal. She was physically better, yes. But emotionally, she was still catching her breath. The collapse had left her shaken, not just by what happened, but by who had been there. Alvin Kingspare, a name she hadn't expected to ever remember. A man who shouldn't have meant anything more than a helpful stranger. But he did. Because he hadn't just answered a phone call, he had answered something deeper. So, when the knock came at her door that Friday afternoon, she knew, before she even peeked through the peephole, that it was him. She opened the door slowly, wearing a loose sweatshirt and jeans, her hair tied up in a scarf. There he stood, in dark jeans, a button-down rolled at the sleeves, and that same calm expression that had become familiar in her memory. "Hey," he said, holding up a small bag. "I brought brisket. And some of those honey butter rolls your daughter told me about." Davina smiled softly, stepping aside to let him in. "Alvina's going to flip. I was hoping she would," he replied. The moment he entered, the apartment seemed to warm, not because of anything he said, but because of how naturally he fit into the space. Like someone who wasn't trying too hard. Someone who remembered. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," he said gently. "I didn't want to intrude." "You're not," Davina said honestly. "It's good to see you," and for the first time since that night, her voice carried no hesitation. They sat on the worn-out couch across from each other, plates in hand. The scent of smoky brisket and seasoned corn filled the apartment, mixing with the faint gospel music coming from the kitchen radio. Alvina sat between them, her legs swinging off the edge, chewing like she was in heaven. "Mr. Alvin," she said between bites, "this is better than Grandma's brisket, but don't tell her I said that." Alvin chuckled. "Your secret's safe with me." Davina smiled, watching the two of them. She hadn't seen Alvina this joyful since before the hospital, and truthfully, she couldn't remember the last time she had shared a meal with a man who didn't feel like a guest, but rather like a presence. Their conversation drifted from casual to curious. "So, is it weird being the boss of so many people?" she asked, wiping her fingers with a napkin. Alvin leaned back. "Sometimes. I like creating things, spaces people enjoy, but I've realized I spend more time building for others than living for myself." Davina tilted her head. "That sounds lonely." He nodded. "It can be." She hesitated before replying. "I know what that feels like." Their eyes met again, this time not as strangers bound by crisis, but as two adults who understood the weight of responsibility. Alvina ran to her room to grab a toy, giving them a moment alone. Davina took a slow sip of sweet tea. "You didn't have to come today, but I'm glad you did." "I didn't want that night to be the end of our conversation," Alvin admitted. "You're not just someone I helped. You're someone I'd like to know better." Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in quiet acceptance. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to guard her heart behind polite smiles. As dusk crept through the windows and the barbecue dinner faded into paper plates and laughter, Alvina began to wind down. She sat curled up on the floor, head resting on her stuffed bunny, eyes blinking slower with each moment. "Someone's fading," Alvin said softly. Davina stood to stretch. "I'll put her down," but before she could scoop the little girl up, Alvin moved first. Davina gave a small nod. He leaned down and lifted Alvina with ease, the way someone holds something precious without needing instruction. Alvina barely stirred, nestling into his chest as if she belonged there. Alvin followed Davina down the short hallway to Alvina's room. The walls were painted a soft pink, covered in paper drawings and alphabet magnets. A small twin bed sat in the corner with cartoon sheets and a nightlight casting stars on the ceiling. Alvin laid her down gently, tucking the blanket around her tiny shoulders. Davina leaned in to kiss her daughter's forehead, whispering, "You did so good today, baby." Alvin watched from behind, his expression unreadable, not stiff, not stoic, just deeply aware of the moment's tenderness. As they walked back to the living room in silence, the air between them changed. The house didn't feel like a place he was visiting anymore. It felt like a place he had been quietly invited into. And Davina, she felt that too. Back in the living room, Davina sat on the armrest of the couch, while Alvin stood near the door, unsure if it was time to leave or stay a little longer. She studied him, not with the curiosity of a woman figuring out a man's intentions, but with the softness of someone realizing that she didn't need to overthink this. "You know," she said slowly, "you were a stranger that night." "I was," Alvin agreed. "But the way you looked at my daughter in the hospital—" She paused, the memory still vivid. "I've known people my whole life who wouldn't have shown up the way you did." He didn't interrupt. "You stayed, you held her, you didn't run when it got uncomfortable." Alvin stepped closer, voice low. "It didn't feel like something I had to do. It felt like something I was meant to do." Davina's eyes flicked toward the bracelet on her wrist, the silver one engraved with Alvina's name. Her fingers brushed over it absent-mindedly. "I never expected a moment like that to lead to this," she admitted. "To me standing here in your living room, finishing your daughter's macaroni and dodging compliments?" Alvin teased gently. She laughed, not loud, not showy, but in that warm, throat-deep way that made her eyes shimmer. "No," she smiled. "To me feeling like maybe I don't have to do everything alone anymore." Alvin met her gaze, steady and sure. "You don't—" The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was filled with understanding, and for the first time since her collapse, Davina let her guard down completely, not with a kiss or a promise, but with a smile that said, "You're welcome here." The days following their shared barbecue brought a quiet but steady shift in Davina's life. Alvin didn't overwhelm her with visits. He didn't text her constantly. He didn't force himself into her space. But he showed up, with intention, with gentleness, and with timing that felt almost heaven-sent. On Monday morning, she opened her door to a small basket filled with fresh fruit and herbal tea packets. No note, no signature, just a knock she didn't catch in time and a sense of care that didn't ask for credit. On Wednesday, Alvina came running into the living room waving a small card. "Mummy, Mr. Alvin left this at the door. It got cartoons on it." It was a get-well-soon card hand-drawn by an illustrator from Alvin's company. Bright colors, simple shapes, and a tiny girl holding a superhero cape. Thursday brought a gentle text, headed by the clinic today. "If you need groceries, I'll grab some while I'm out." He wasn't hovering. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply filling the spaces where strain usually lived. Davina noticed the difference, not just in the gestures but in the peace that came with them. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to hold all the weight alone, but the most meaningful gesture came the following weekend when he asked carefully, "Can I check on you after your doctor's appointment?" "Only if you're comfortable." She hesitated, not out of mistrust, but out of unfamiliarity. Men didn't usually ask permission to care. They just appeared when convenient and disappeared just as quickly. But Alvin, he moved differently. "Yes," she finally replied. "I'd like that." And with those 4 words, a new chapter quietly began. Saturday morning sunlight streamed through the clinic windows as Davina signed in at the front desk. Alvina sat beside her, humming a gospel tune from church choir. When Alvin walked in, crisp button-down, sleeves rolled just above the wrist. He didn't stride in like a CEO entering a boardroom. He approached slowly, making sure not to overstep. "You made it," he said with a warm smile. "I did," she said softly. He sat beside her in the waiting area, quietly offering company, not commentary. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. "A little," she admitted. Her fainting spell had shaken her more than she let on. She'd pushed herself for months, skipping meals, ignoring fatigue, brushing aside headaches. Now she feared what her body might be trying to tell her. When her name was called, she took a deep breath. "Alvin," she said hesitantly, "could you watch Alvina for me? Just while I'm in with the doctor." "Of course." No hesitation, no assumptions, just genuine readiness. He led Alvina to the clinic play area, helping her choose stickers, coloring pages and puzzles. He listened as she told him every detail about her new school friend, her favorite choir song, and how she loved putting bows on her hair even when the wind tried to steal them. Inside the exam room, Davina underwent a full evaluation, from heart rhythm tests to hydration assessments. When the doctor recommended a deeper set of heart scans for precaution, she nodded, but fear curled inside her. When she walked out, she found Alvin sitting on the floor cross-legged, helping Alvina build a block tower. The sight made something soften inside her chest. "How did it go?" he asked as he rose to his feet. "They want to run more tests," she said quietly, "just to be safe." His expression didn't shift into panic or pity. He simply nodded, steady as always. "I know a cardiologist here in Houston," he said gently. "He's excellent. No pressure at all, but if you want, I can help you get an appointment." Unexpected, but comforting. Davina swallowed. "Thank you. Really, I'm here," he said simply, and she believed him. Later that evening, they sat outside on the small front steps of her apartment. The neighborhood was quiet, lit by the warm glow of porch lights and the soft chatter of neighbors heading back from the corner store. Alvina played hopscotch nearby, giggling every time she missed a square. Davina stared at her hands before speaking. "You know, I don't usually talk about my past." Alvin turned slightly toward her, patient. "My mom passed when I was young," she began. "She worked 2 jobs, did everything she could, and when she got sick, it all happened so fast." He stayed silent, letting her talk. "She was my whole world," Davina continued. "After she passed, it was just me, and then when I got older, my father left, turned his life into something polished and successful somewhere far from here." She wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed. "I learned to keep going, to be strong, to raise my daughter with love even when my heart felt empty." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't let people in easily, Alvin. Not because I don't want to, but because losing people hurts more than being alone." He didn't give advice. He didn't tell her to move on. He didn't try to fix anything. He looked at her with a softness she'd never been offered. "You're allowed to feel all of that," he said quietly. "You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to protect your heart." A slow breath escaped her lips. For the first time, she didn't feel judged. She felt understood. After a few quiet moments, Alvin shifted slightly. "You're not the only one who's carried things alone," he admitted. Davina looked up. "My father wasn't around much when I was growing up," he said. "Not out of neglect, but because he buried himself in work. Building something was his entire identity, and I guess I followed in his footsteps more than I meant to." He let out a slow exhale. "My mother passed away while I was still in college. She was the one who kept balance in my life. After she was gone, work filled every empty space." Davina listened intently. "I traveled so much I forgot what home felt like," he continued. "Hotels became familiar. Not comforting, just familiar. And the more my company grew, the smaller my world became." He paused. "I didn't realize how lonely I was until that phone call came in. Hearing a child cry like that, it woke something up in me." He looked at her, eyes steady. "It reminded me that life shouldn't only be about deadlines and goals. It should be about people." Davina swallowed. "You really are different," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Maybe I've just been waiting for the right people to remind me who I want to be." The days that followed unfolded like slow petals, not rushed, not forced, but opening with perfect timing. They began taking walks through Discovery Green on early evenings. Alvin bought ice cream for Alvina, who always chose the flavor with the most sprinkles. Davina teased him about how he held his cone too carefully, as if afraid to spill even a drop. They shared simple meals, jambalaya in her kitchen, sandwiches on her porch, and once, a quiet dinner at a small soul food spot where Alvin thanked the chef personally because the greens tasted like someone's grandma made them. He attended church one Sunday, not out of performance, but because Alvina asked. "Sit by me," she'd said, tugging his sleeve. He did. He clapped off beat during the songs. stood tall during the prayers, and when the choir sang, Davina saw him watching her, not in a way that made her shy, but in a way that made her feel seen. Not as the woman who worked long shifts, not as the woman who fainted in her own living room, but as Davina, woman with a quiet fire inside. The slow burn connection between them grew naturally, in soft smiles, shared laughter, gentle touches when their hands brushed, and the unspoken safety that had formed between them. One evening, after dropping them off, Alvin lingered near the car. "I like this," he said softly. "Like what?" Davina asked. "This," he repeated. "Us, building something." Slowly, her breath caught. She didn't run from it. "Me too," she whispered, and under the warm glow of the apartment lights, a new chapter settled quietly into place. Not loud, not rushed, but full of promise. It started with a walk, not a date, not a grand gesture, just a quiet evening stroll after Alvina's school event. The sky was painted orange and blue. Alvina walked ahead, skipping over cracks in the sidewalk. Davina and Alvin followed behind her, close but not touching. They talked about little things, favorite songs, coffee preferences, childhood habits. When they reached her building, Davina hesitated at the steps. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. Alvin didn't rush to answer. He just smiled. Only if it's okay, it was. And from there it continued, quietly, gently, without the pressure to name what was unfolding. Some nights he'd join them for dinner. Other times they'd walk the flea market together or share hush puppies at the food truck park. No labels, no expectations. Davina was unsure at first. After all, her life had been built around protecting herself and her daughter. Her heart was cautious, scarred by promises never kept. But Alvin didn't press. He respected her space, emotionally and physically, and that made all the difference. What surprised her most wasn't the dates. It was how natural everything felt. Alvina would cheer when she saw his car pull up. "Mr. Alvin's here," she'd yell from the window, running to fix her hair or grab her drawings to show him. And Davina? She found herself smiling more, laughing more, even letting herself wonder, what if this isn't temporary? One Friday evening the sky opened with soft drizzle, but the rain couldn't cancel their plans. "Still up for the concert?" Alvin asked. "Absolutely," Davina said, pulling on her jacket. The local jazz night was happening under a covered pavilion downtown. Candles lit each table, the band warmed up slowly, and the crowd murmured with anticipation. They sat side by side, close enough to share heat. The music began, smooth, slow, with saxophones and upright bass weaving through the rhythm. Davina leaned into it, and Alvin leaned a little closer. His fingers brushed hers on the bench. Not rushed, not assumed, just an invitation. She looked at him. He didn't speak. She turned her hand palm up, and he laced his fingers through hers. The world didn't shift dramatically. It didn't need to. The small act was enough to draw a quiet breath from her chest, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Later that night, after walking her and Alvina home, he stood on the front step. "Tonight was beautiful," he said. "So were you," she whispered, before she could stop herself. He leaned in, not to kiss her lips, but to press a slow kiss to her forehead. One hand cupped the side of her face gently. Davina closed her eyes. It wasn't a move. It wasn't part of a plan. It was presence, tender, considerate, just like him. One Tuesday morning, Davina stood in front of Alvin's office tower downtown, holding Alvina's hand and squinting up at the glass building. "Mommy, this place looks like a candy box for grown-ups." Davina laughed. "More like a bank vault." Inside, the security guard waved Alvin's guests through. Davina felt slightly out of place, her braided hair tied up in a bun, her sundress swaying as they stepped into the elevator. The office was sleek, clean white walls, digital art frames, staff dressed like magazine covers. Alvin met them at the elevator, and the moment he hugged Alvina and asked about her school art project, all the corporate gloss faded. "You hungry?" he asked. Alvina nodded eagerly. "Only if they have mac and cheese." He chuckled. "We do, but I can't promise it'll beat your mom's." They ate in the executive kitchen, fancy, polished, but Davina noticed something else. Alvin made space. He introduced her to his assistant by name. He asked for her opinion about the new cafe logo mock-up. He made sure Alvina had crayons and a quiet space while they talked. Still, when she looked around, Davina felt the weight of difference. Her neighborhood was lined with soul food shacks and barbershops, where neighbors called each other auntie, whether or not they were related. Alvin's world was glass and marble and espresso machines that cost more than her rent. But he wasn't trying to replace her world. He was inviting her into his without trying to change hers. And that meant everything. It was Alvina who said it first. They were sitting on a picnic blanket in MacGregor Park, the wind soft, the smell of grilled ribs floating from a nearby family reunion. Davina had laid back, her head in Alvin's lap. Alvina sat beside them, eating grapes and colouring in a workbook. "Mr. Alvin?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you my friend or my family?" Alvin paused. He looked at Davina. She looked back, curious what he'd say. He turned to Alvina. "What do you think?" "I think you feel like both," she said. "You come to church. You give good hugs. You remember stuff." Davina smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Alvina's face. Alvin leaned down and kissed the top of the little girl's head. "Then both it is," he said gently. Davina sat up, her heart fuller than it had been in years. Alvin had become a rhythm in their lives. Not loud, not flashy, but always showing up in the right beat. Whether it was helping Alvina with homework while Davina folded laundry, or remembering how Davina liked her tea with 2 spoons of honey, or fixing the squeaky window in their hallway without being asked. He had made space, real space, not just in their schedule, but in their lives, in their hearts. That night, as Davina watched him walk back to his car, Alvina curled beside her on the couch. "Mummy." "Yes, baby." "I think God sent him," Davina's voice caught. "I think so too." She and Alvin were seated on her small porch after Alvina had gone to bed. A soft breeze rustled the trees while a jazz station played faintly from her kitchen window. Davina sat quietly, nursing her tea. Alvin noticed the tension in her shoulders, the silence heavy between them. "Rough day?" he asked gently. She shrugged, eyes staring into the distance. "Just memories sneaking up again." He waited. She didn't speak. But then, unprompted, she exhaled a truth she hadn't said out loud in years. "My father's name is Miles Kingston." Alvin blinked. "As in Kingston Enterprises?" Davina nodded slowly. "He lives in Chicago now. Big-time CEO. The kind of man who sits on boards, gives interviews about family values, but doesn't call his own daughter." Alvin didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I was 11 when he left. Said he had business to handle up north. My mama waited, wrote letters, called, but he never came back. Not even when she passed." The bitterness in her voice was quiet, but it cut deep. Alvin reached out and took her hand. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to," she whispered. It was a secret she'd buried in the corners of her soul, one she never imagined sharing. But somehow, Alvin's presence made her feel safe, seen, not judged. She stared into the darkness, her voice lower. "I don't know what hurts more, that he left, or that he never even tried to know Alvina." And with that, the silence returned, but now it carried a truth neither of them could ignore. 2 days passed before Alvin brought it up again. They were driving home from a school art fair, Alvina asleep in the back seat, clutching her paper sunflower masterpiece. The streetlights flickered past like quiet markers of memory. Alvin cleared his throat. "Davina, I've been thinking about what you told me." She didn't respond right away. "I know it's not my place," he continued, keeping his voice soft, "but I think maybe it's time." "Time for what?" she asked, eyes forward. "To reach out to him." Her body stiffened. "Why would I?" "Not for him," Alvin said quickly. "For you. For your peace. For closure." Davina scoffed. "Closure's a luxury for people who had the chance to say goodbye." He didn't push. He just nodded slowly. But as they pulled into her driveway, he added gently, "Sometimes the peace we seek doesn't come from the answers, but from knowing we had the courage to ask." Davina bit her lip. "I don't even know what I'd say." "You don't have to know right now," Alvin replied. "But if the door ever opens, even a crack, maybe you walk through it. Just enough to see what's on the other side." That night, after Alvin left, Davina sat on the edge of her bed staring at an old envelope. The return address said Chicago. She had never opened it. It was postmarked 2 years after her mother's funeral. She had kept it buried in her dresser drawer like it had no power, but tonight it felt like it was humming with something old and painful. And maybe Alvin was right. The next morning Davina couldn't concentrate. She burned the eggs, forgot to pack Alvina's math folder, stared at the same page in her journal for an hour. Her emotions were raw, unpredictable. That letter sat on the kitchen table like a dare. What would he even look like now? What if he's sick? What if he doesn't remember Mama's birthday? What if he doesn't care? Memories clawed their way to the surface. The time she waited by the window for 3 birthdays in a row, dressed in her best church shoes. The last night her mother cried herself to sleep while pretending to be strong. The food stamps, the cold winters, the unanswered questions. And now Alvin, kind, patient Alvin, was suggesting she invite that kind of pain back into her world. Davina paced. Alvina sat at the table colouring quietly, unaware of the storm her mother was wrestling. Davina finally sat across from her and asked softly, "Baby, do you ever wonder who your grandpa is?" Alvina looked up. "You mean Grandma's husband?" Davina nodded. Alvina shrugged. "Maybe sometimes, but not really. We got each other, right?" Davina swallowed a lump in her throat. "Yeah, we do," but even as she smiled, something inside her ached. She wasn't seeking a father, she was seeking freedom, from the weight of what he'd left behind. That Sunday, they sat in the back row of church. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, about grace not being a favor, but a freedom. Davina fidgeted. Her thoughts weren't on the sermon, they were stuck on a name. Miles Kingston. After service, she and Alvin took Alvina to the park. As the little girl ran to join the children at the playground, Alvin turned to Davina. "I hope you don't think I'm pushing," he said gently. She shook her head. "No, you're just making me think. Hard." He gave her a soft smile. "You don't owe him anything. Not your love, not your story, but maybe you owe yourself the chance to be free of it." She looked at him. "Families aren't always blood," Alvin added, "but sometimes healing needs a door cracked open, just enough for light to get in." Davina didn't answer right away. She just watched her daughter laugh under the sun, swinging higher and higher, arms outstretched like wings. She closed her eyes. "Do you think healing starts with forgiveness?" she asked. "I think healing starts with honesty," Alvin replied, "and ends with peace." Davina breathed deeply. She wasn't ready yet, but maybe. She was ready to want to be. That night, she slid the unopened envelope into her purse, just in case. Davina stared at the blinking cursor for what felt like an hour. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, flanked by a cooling mug of chamomile and Alvina's glitter markers. The unopened letter from her father now lay to the side, read and reread over the past week, its words hollow but heavy. She had spent days drafting messages in her head. Angry ones, cold ones, desperate ones, but none of them felt right. This morning she finally felt ready to send something real. She opened her browser, typed Kingston Group corporate contact, and found a simple inquiry form. But instead of using it, she searched deeper, until she found the assistant's direct email. Her fingers trembled as she typed. Subject, from Davina Chris. "Hello, my name is Davina. I believe you may know my mother. Her name was Rochelle Chris. I don't want anything. I just needed to say that I exist and I'm doing okay. I have a daughter now. Her name is Alvina. She's 7. I thought about reaching out for years, but I was scared, angry even. I'm still working through that. Davina." She read it twice. Simple, no blame, just truth. She hit send before she could change her mind. And then her chest tightened like she'd released something that had been buried so deep she forgot how much it weighed. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. Davina had almost convinced herself it was better this way, that the silence was the answer, until one Sunday afternoon she stepped out of her bar shift and pulled her phone from her bag. One unread email, subject, "Thank you." She tapped it with trembling fingers. "Davina, I saw your email, and I also saw something else this morning, a flyer for the Houston Inner Heart Foundation." There was a photo of a woman reading to children at a shelter. You. I knew right away. You look just like your mother. And your eyes, they're mine. I've lived with the weight of walking away for over 20 years. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was unworthy, that you were better off. But I never stopped thinking about you. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet. I don't expect anything. I just want to see you, to know the woman you've become. I'm staying in Houston this weekend. Here's my number. I'll be waiting. Miles Kingston. Davina dropped her phone on the counter and covered her mouth. Alvina, playing nearby with her dolls, looked up. Mommy, you okay? Davina nodded, but tears spilled down her cheeks anyway. The father, who vanished into silence, had spoken, and this time, he wanted to be found. Davina didn't reply right away. She needed space to breathe, to think, to let the idea settle. Her first instinct was fear, then anger, then confusion. But eventually, curiosity. She reread the email the next morning, standing at her bathroom sink. She looked at herself in the mirror and tried to imagine the face of a man who could walk away from a family, yet write so gently now. She called Alvin. He arrived 20 minutes later, holding coffee and patience. I got an email, she said as they sat on the porch. Alvin stayed quiet as she handed him the phone. When he finished reading, he handed it back with a simple, steady nod. What do I do? She asked. I can't answer that, he said honestly. But I can tell you this. You don't owe him a perfect response. You only owe yourself the chance to be honest with your heart. Davina looked down at her hands. I'm scared it'll hurt. Alvin leaned in. It probably will, but that doesn't mean it won't also heal something. That night, after putting Alvina to bed, Davina sat at her desk with the soft light of the table lamp casting shadows across her notebooks. She picked up her phone and typed, I'm available Saturday afternoon. Let's meet at the park near 7th and Grove. I'll bring the coffee. Then she hit send and let her heart exhale. Saturday arrived and the sky wore the kind of gentle blue that felt like mercy. Davina stood under the tall oak tree in the park near 7th and Grove, the same one where she'd taken Alvina on her best days. She wore a soft blue sundress, not too formal, not too casual, just herself. Her hands were wrapped tightly around 2 coffee cups. Her heart beat fast. Every sound, footsteps, birds, the rustle of leaves, sounded louder, heavier. Then she saw him, a tall, silver-haired man walking slowly across the park path. No security, no assistance, just him, Miles Kingston. He looked older than she remembered from the last photo her mother had saved. But the eyes, they were unmistakable. He stopped a few feet from her. Davina held her breath. You came, he said, voice thick. I said I would. He nodded, eyes glassy. I didn't know if I'd recognize you, but the second I saw you... His voice broke. Davina handed him a coffee. I didn't come for answers, she said softly. I came to see if I could stand in front of you and not feel hate anymore. Miles swallowed hard. And, can you? I don't know, she replied, but I can start here. They sat on the bench. No big speeches, no dramatic tears, just a daughter and a father sharing coffee, for the first time in 2 decades. And in that still moment, the healing began. The cafe Alvin chose wasn't flashy. It wasn't one of his corporate locations downtown. Instead, he picked a smaller branch in Midtown, warm yellow lighting, local artwork on the walls and windows that welcomed the sunlight like a gentle blessing. Davina appreciated the atmosphere instantly. It was soft, human, not intimidating. Alvina walked beside her mother, holding her hand. Alvin followed closely, protective but not overbearing. For today, he let Davina lead. Let her choose every step of this fragile journey. Miles Kingston sat at a corner table, his back straight, his hands clasped together. His grey hair looked slightly ruffled, as if he'd run his fingers through it too many times. His suit was expensive, but his posture wasn't proud. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. When he saw them approaching, Davina, her small daughter, and the man standing just behind them, he rose immediately. His eyes locked onto Davina, then her daughter, then Alvin. But his gaze always returned to Davina, as if trying to memorize the face he had missed for decades. Davina swallowed hard. Hi! Miles's voice cracked. Hello, sweetheart. Alvina tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is that him?" Davina nodded slowly. "Yes, baby, that's your grandpa." Alvina gave a shy wave. "Hi." Miles placed a hand over his heart. "Hello, little one." Alvin placed a supportive hand at the small of Davina's back, reminding her she wasn't facing this alone. They sat down, and the sunlight spilled across the table as if blessing a moment that had been waiting 20 years to arrive. The air around the table felt tight at first, like each person was afraid to move wrong. Miles kept glancing at Davina, eyes glossy, breath uneven. Davina kept her palms flat on her knees, grounding herself with slow inhales. Alvin watched quietly, his presence steady, not interfering. A server came over. They ordered drinks. Sweet tea for Davina, warm milk for Alvina, plain black coffee for Miles. Alvin chose a caramel latte, which made Alvina giggle. "You always get the grown-up version of chocolate milk," she whispered to him. The moment lightened the air just a little. Miles cleared his throat. "Davina, I want to thank you for meeting me. I didn't expect you to say yes." She looked at him, voice calm but guarded. "I wasn't sure I would." He nodded, accepting her honesty without flinching. "I know I've forfeited every right to your forgiveness. But to be here, across from you, it feels like more than I deserve." Davina lifted a brow. "You left us. You didn't even come back when Mom got sick." Miles inhaled sharply, the kind of inhale that carries regret heavier than shame. "I know," he whispered. "And not a day goes by that I don't wish I could go back and do it differently." For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe chatter faded. The air thickened with truth. That was when the healing began. Loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like old wounds finally seeing fresh air. Miles took off his glasses, wiping his eyes with trembling fingers. The controlled CEO facade slipped completely. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared I'd fail you. Scared I'd repeat my own father's mistakes. When your mother got sick, I convinced myself you'd be better off without me." He swallowed hard. But that was cowardice, not protection. Davina held her breath, absorbing his confession. Alvina watched him with innocent curiosity. "Grandpa, why didn't you just come back and say sorry?" The question pierced the air. Miles choked back a sob. I should have come running. I should have been there for your mother. For you." He looked at Davina again, eyes filled with grief. "If you never want a place for me in your life, I'll accept that. But please, let me apologize. Let me say it out loud, so you hear it from the man who abandoned you." Davina looked away, emotion rising like a tide she couldn't control. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "I know. You broke something in me." Miles nodded again. "I know. You don't get to erase that." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I know." Then she looked up, eyes strong, steady, grounded by her own journey. "But you're here now. You answered the door I cracked open." Miles placed his hand on the table, not reaching for her, just offering space. "I'm asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "Whether it comes today, next year, or never." Davina's lips quivered. This was the apology she had waited for, the one she thought she would never receive. Minutes passed. Not rushed minutes, heavy, quiet ones. Alvin watched her, silently encouraging her to breathe, to trust her intuition, to honor her own heart. Davina wiped her cheek, exhaling slowly. "I can't give you forgiveness today," she said softly. "Not fully," Miles nodded, accepting the weight of her words. "But," she continued, "I can give you a beginning." He looked up, hope flickering like a trembling flame. "I don't know where this road goes," she admitted. "I don't know what a father-daughter relationship looks like after 20 years. "I'm willing to learn," Miles whispered. Davina offered a small, painful smile. "And I'm willing to try." Alvina leaned in, touching Miles's hand with her tiny fingers. "Mommy always says trying is the first step to fixing things." Miles covered her hand gently, tears slipping freely now. "You're a very wise little girl." Davina watched them. A grandfather meeting a granddaughter he never knew. A grandfather being offered his second chance not through perfection, but through grace. She placed her hand over her heart, steadying the mix of relief, sorrow, and fragile hope. She wasn't healing for him, she was healing for herself. When the sunlight shifted across the cafe floor, their drinks nearly finished, Miles excused himself to take a moment outside. He said he needed fresh air, and a moment to collect the heart he'd poured out. As he walked away, Davina leaned back in her chair, releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. Alvin shifted closer, his hand brushing hers gently. "You did something brave today," he whispered. She looked at him, eyes softening. "I couldn't have done it without you." She watched Alvina laughing softly at her coloring book. Then her gaze drifted to the window, where Miles stood, shoulders shaking as he cried into his hands. Davina swallowed. "He needs a chance," she said quietly. "Not a clean slate, not a free pass, just a chance." "That's grace," Alvin replied. "That's strength." Her throat tightened. "How did you know what I needed?" Alvin brushed a loose curl behind her ear. "Because I know you, and because I've healed from my own past by letting people back in." She blinked back new tears, not from pain, but from the powerful feeling of being understood. "You're the bridge that brought us back," she whispered. Alvin didn't respond immediately. He cupped her cheek gently, leaning his forehead to hers. "I just want to see you whole," he murmured. In that moment, with her father waiting outside, her daughter drawing flowers at the table, and the man who had unknowingly become her anchor sitting beside her, Davina realized something. Healing wasn't a finish line, it was a journey, and she wasn't walking it alone anymore.